I built an empire on the backs of men who worked for wages that barely kept them alive. I crushed competitors who had families depending on them. I broke strikes that workers organised to feed their children. I cut wages when margins tightened. I replaced workers who demanded more. I prioritised efficiency over humanity. I chose profit over people. I built an empire and people suffered in the building. This is the truth about building empires, the truth no one wants to hear, the truth that success stories omit, the truth that biographies sanitize, the truth that history softens, the truth that I must tell because I lived it, because I built it, because I made the choices, because I bear the responsibility, because the ethics of building an empire are complicated, are brutal, are costly, are real, are unavoidable, are the choices I made. The truth about the ethics of building an empire. Let me tell you about these ethics, not the simple version, not the clean version, not the version that makes me look noble or makes empire building look pure, but the real ethics, the actual choices, the genuine dilemmas, the true costs, the real decisions I faced every day for 50 years, the ethics of building an empire, complicated, brutal, necessary, costly, real, the ethics I lived, the choices I made, the responsibility I bear, the truth about the ethics of building an empire. You cannot build an empire without hurting people. This is the first truth, the foundational truth, the truth that underlies everything else. You cannot build an empire without hurting people. You cannot dominate an industry without destroying competitors. You cannot maximize efficiency without minimizing wages. You cannot grow rapidly without exploiting advantages. You cannot build big without making others small. You cannot rise without others falling. You cannot win without others losing. You cannot build an empire without hurting people. This is not opinion. This is not judgment. This is reality. This is mathematics. This is how empire building works. You cannot build an empire without hurting people. I hurt people, many people, workers whose wages I cut, competitors whose businesses I destroyed, suppliers whose margins I squeezed, communities that depended on businesses I crushed, families that suffered when I broke strikes, people, real people, with names and faces and children and hopes and dreams. I hurt them, not accidentally, not unintentionally, not as unfortunate side effect, but as necessary consequence of building, as required cost of growth, as inevitable result of competition, as unavoidable outcome of maximizing efficiency. I hurt people deliberately, systematically, repeatedly for 50 years. I hurt people building my empire. This is the ethical reality of empire building. You will hurt people. You must hurt people. You cannot avoid hurting people. The only question is whether you acknowledge it, whether you accept responsibility, whether you try to minimize harm, whether you justify it, whether you rationalize it, whether you pretend it is not happening, but you cannot avoid it. You cannot build an empire without hurting people. This is the first ethical truth, the foundational truth, the truth I had to face, the truth every empire builder must face. You cannot build an empire without hurting people. The question is not whether to hurt people. The question is whether the empire justifies the hurt. This is the second truth, the harder truth, the truth that has no clear answer. If you accept that you cannot build an empire without hurting people, then you must ask whether the empire is worth the hurt, whether the good the empire creates justifies the harm it causes, whether the value produced exceeds the suffering inflicted, whether the benefit outweighs the cost, whether building is worth hurting. This is the question, the ethical question, the question with no easy answer, the question I asked myself 10,000 times, the question I still cannot answer definitively, whether the empire justifies the hurt. Carnegie Steel employed thousands of workers, provided jobs, paid wages, supported families, created employment, but the wages were low, the conditions were dangerous, the hours were long, the work was hard. People suffered working for me, people died in my mills, people were injured in my factories, people struggled on the wages I paid, people suffered, but they had employment, had wages, had something. Without Carnegie Steel, they might have had nothing, might have starved, might have had no options. The employment I provided was better than no employment. The wages I paid were better than no wages. The suffering I caused was less than the suffering of complete destitution. Maybe, possibly, perhaps. I tell myself this, I believe this, I hope this is true, but I do not know. I cannot know. I cannot measure suffering prevented against suffering caused, cannot calculate value created against harm inflicted, cannot determine definitively whether the empire justified the hurt. Carnegie Steel built infrastructure, made steel that built bridges, built buildings, built railroads, built cities, built America, infrastructure that millions of people used, benefit that millions of people received, value that society gained, progress that humanity achieved. The empire created value beyond itself, created benefit beyond profits, created progress beyond wealth. Infrastructure mattered, cities mattered, progress mattered. Maybe the hurt was justified by this. Maybe the suffering of thousands was worth the progress of millions. Maybe the harm to workers was justified by benefit to society. Maybe. I tell myself this, I believe this, I hope this is true, but I do not know. I cannot know. I cannot weigh harm to individuals against benefit to society, cannot measure suffering of few against progress of many, cannot determine definitively whether the empire justified the hurt. This is the ethical dilemma, the unanswerable question, the choice with no clear right answer. You will hurt people building an empire. The empire will create value. The question is whether the value justifies the hurt, whether the benefit outweighs the harm, whether building is worth the cost. I face this question every day. I answered it by building, by choosing to continue, by deciding the empire was worth the hurt. But I do not know if I was right. I cannot know if I was right. I can only live with the choice I made, the ethical choice with no clear answer, whether the empire justified the hurt. There is always a choice between more profit and less suffering. This is the third truth, the practical truth, the daily truth. Every decision as an empire builder involves this choice: pay higher wages or maintain higher profits, improve safety conditions or reduce costs, shorten hours or maximize productivity, treat workers humanely or treat them efficiently, more profit or less suffering. This choice appears constantly, daily, in every decision, in every policy, in every strategy. Every choice involves this trade-off: more profit or less suffering. And choosing profit means choosing suffering. Choosing efficiency means choosing harm. Choosing growth means choosing hurt. This choice is constant, is unavoidable, is the daily ethical reality of empire building. I chose profit repeatedly, constantly, systematically. When wages could have been higher, I kept them lower to maintain margins. When safety could have been better, I kept it minimal to reduce costs. When hours could have been shorter, I kept them longer to maximize output. When treatment could have been humane, I kept it efficient to improve productivity. I chose profit over less suffering, over better wages, over safer conditions, over shorter hours, over humane treatment. I chose profit. This was my choice. This was how I built the empire. This was the ethical choice I made thousands of times. Choose profit over less suffering. Choose efficiency over humanity. Choose growth over compassion. choose empire over people. I chose, and people suffered because of my choices. But I rationalized, everyone rationalizes. I told myself I was paying market wages, that I was providing employment that would not exist otherwise, that I was building something important, that efficiency was necessary for competition, that the market required these choices, that I had no choice, that this was just business, that everyone did it, that the system demanded it, that I was not responsible for the system, that I was just operating within it. I rationalized, created justifications, built explanations, developed reasoning. That made my choices seem necessary, seem inevitable, seem justified, seem acceptable. I rationalized. Everyone rationalizes, but rationalization does not change reality, does not undo suffering, does not eliminate harm, does not absolve responsibility, just makes choices easier to live with. Rationalization is how empire builders sleep at night, how I slept at night, how anyone who chooses profit over less suffering sleeps at night. The truth is, I could have paid more, could have provided better conditions, could have shortened hours, could have treated workers more humanely, could have chosen less profit and less suffering. This was possible, this was choice, this was option I rejected. I chose profit over less suffering, not because I had no choice, but because I chose profit, because building the empire mattered more than reducing suffering, because growth mattered more than compassion, because winning mattered more than humanity. I chose, I am responsible. I cannot hide behind market forces or competitive necessity or business logic. I chose, and people suffered because I chose profit over less suffering. Power creates responsibility you cannot escape. This is the fourth truth, the truth about power. When you build an empire, you gain power. Power over workers, power over communities, power over markets, power over lives, real power, enormous power, power to affect thousands of people, power to determine their circumstances, power to shape their lives, power to help or harm. Power comes with empire building, unavoidable power, inescapable power, and power creates responsibility. Responsibility for how you use power, responsibility for decisions you make, responsibility for harm you cause, responsibility for suffering you create, responsibility you cannot escape, responsibility that comes with power, responsibility that empire builders bear. I had power over thousands of workers, power to set wages, power to determine conditions, power to establish hours, power to define treatment, real power over real lives, power that affected whether families ate well or poorly, whether children had opportunities or limitations, whether lives were better or worse. Real power, enormous responsibility. Responsibility I could not escape, could not deny, could not avoid. Power creates responsibility, and I had enormous power. Therefore, I had enormous responsibility. Responsibility for choices I made, responsibility for harm I caused, responsibility for suffering I created, responsibility I cannot escape even now. Decades after selling the company, decades after walking away, decades after giving away my fortune, the responsibility remains, the responsibility of power, the responsibility I bore, the responsibility I still bear, the responsibility that comes with building an empire. I exercised power, made decisions that affected lives, set wages that determined living standards, established conditions that created suffering, defined policies that caused harm. I exercised power, and I am responsible. Responsible for every wage I set too low, responsible for every condition I kept too dangerous, responsible for every hour I demanded too many, responsible for every worker I treated too harshly, responsible completely, totally, unavoidably. Power creates responsibility. I had power, therefore I am responsible. This is the ethical truth of empire building. Power creates responsibility you cannot escape, responsibility for choices made, responsibility for harm caused, responsibility for suffering created, responsibility that lasts forever. That history judges that I must answer for, the responsibility of power. You can try to redeem harm, but you cannot undo it. This is the fifth truth, the truth about redemption. After building the empire, after accumulating the wealth, after exercising the power, after causing the harm, you can try to redeem, can try to balance, can try to compensate, can try to atone, can give away fortune, can build libraries, can fund universities, can establish institutions, can try to create good that outweighs harm, can try to redeem, but you cannot undo, cannot bring back workers who died, cannot restore wages you kept low, cannot eliminate suffering you caused, cannot reverse harm you inflicted, cannot undo, can only try to create future good that somehow balances past harm, can try to redeem, but cannot undo. This is the truth, the hard truth, the permanent truth about building empires. You can try to redeem harm, but you cannot undo it. I gave away 90% of my fortune, $350 million, built 2,800 libraries, funded universities, established institutions, created systems that helped millions, tried to redeem, tried to balance, tried to compensate, tried to create good that outweighed harm, tried to build things that justified empire, tried to make the suffering worthwhile, tried to redeem, spent 18 years trying, gave away almost everything trying, built institutions trying, created opportunities trying, helped millions trying, tried to redeem the harm, tried to balance the suffering, tried to justify the choices, tried to make it all worthwhile, tried, but I cannot undo, cannot bring back workers who died in my mills, cannot restore years of suffering to families who struggled on low wages, cannot eliminate injuries that happened in dangerous conditions, cannot reverse harm caused by my choices, cannot undo, can only live with knowledge that I hurt people building empire, that people suffered because of my decisions, that harm was real and permanent and cannot be undone, can give away fortune but cannot undo harm, can build libraries but cannot restore lives, can fund universities but cannot eliminate suffering, can try to redeem but cannot undo. This is the ethical reality, the permanent reality, the reality I'll live with. You can try to redeem harm, but you cannot undo it. Does this mean I should not have built the empire? Does this mean the libraries do not matter because they cannot undo harm? Does this mean redemption is worthless because it cannot reverse past? I do not know. I cannot answer. I can only say that I built, that I hurt people building, that I tried to redeem, that redemption did not undo harm, that both are true, that I must live with both, that history will judge both, that ethics of empire building include both, the building and the harm, the achievement and the suffering, the redemption and the permanent damage, both, always both, cannot separate, cannot choose one without the other, cannot undo harm by trying to redeem, can only acknowledge both, accept both, live with both, the ethics of building an empire. The question every empire builder must answer is whether they can live with the choices. This is the final truth, the personal truth, the truth that matters most in the end. You will make choices, choices that hurt people, choices that cause suffering, choices that create harm, choices that cannot be undone. You will make these choices building your empire, and you must answer whether you can live with them, whether you can accept responsibility, whether you can bear the weight, whether you can carry the knowledge, whether you can face the consequences, whether you can live with the choices. This is the question, the personal question, the question only you can answer, whether you can live with the choices required to build an empire, I can live with my choices, barely, some days easily, some days with difficulty, some days with peace, some days with guilt, some days with pride in what I built, some days with shame for how I built it. I can live with my choices because I believe the empire created value, because I believe the libraries matter, because I believe infrastructure helped millions, because I believe progress justified cost, because I believe redemption balanced harm. I believe, I hope, I tell myself, but I do not know, cannot know, can only live with the choices, can only carry the responsibility, can only bear the weight, can only accept the consequences, can live with my choices barely, but I can live with them, but many cannot. Many empire builders cannot live with their choices, cannot face the harm they caused, cannot accept the responsibility, cannot bear the weight, cannot carry the knowledge, destroy themselves, lose themselves, become hollow, become broken, become consumed by guilt or denial or both, cannot live with the choices required to build empires. This is why empire building is dangerous, not just to workers, not just to competitors, not just to communities, but to the builder, to the person making choices, to the soul bearing responsibility, to the conscience carrying weight. Empire building is dangerous to the builder because the choices required may be choices you cannot live with, may be harm you cannot bear, maybe responsibility you cannot carry, maybe weight you cannot lift, maybe consequences you cannot face, may destroy you, may break you, may consume you. The ethics of empire building are dangerous to the empire builder. So let me tell you what I learned about the ethics of building an empire, what I know from living it, from facing the choices, from making the decisions, from causing the harm, from bearing the responsibility, from trying to redeem, from living with the consequences. What I learned about the ethics of building an empire. You cannot build an empire without hurting people. This is certain. This is unavoidable. This is reality. Accept this or do not build empires, but do not pretend you can build without hurting. You cannot. The empire must justify the hurt. This is the ethical requirement, the moral obligation, the standard you must meet. If the empire does not create value beyond itself, does not benefit more than it harms, does not produce good that outweighs suffering, then the empire is not justified, then the hurt is not acceptable, then building was wrong. The empire must justify the hurt. This is the ethical requirement. Every choice between profit and suffering is a moral choice, not just business, not just economics, not just strategy, moral choice. Choice with ethical consequences, choice that creates responsibility, choice that causes harm, choice you must answer for. Every choice between profit and suffering is a moral choice. Recognize this, accept this, choose consciously, choose deliberately, choose knowing consequences, choose accepting responsibility, but recognize every choice. Power creates responsibility you cannot escape. When you build empire, you gain power. Power creates responsibility. Responsibility for choices, responsibility for harm, responsibility for suffering, responsibility you cannot deny, cannot avoid, cannot escape. Power creates responsibility. Accept responsibility, bear responsibility, answer for responsibility. Do not pretend power does not create responsibility. It does, unavoidably, permanently, completely. You can try to redeem, but you cannot undo. After building, after hurting, after causing harm, you can try to create good that balances harm, can try to build things that justify empire, can try to redeem, but you cannot undo harm caused, cannot restore lives damaged, cannot eliminate suffering created, cannot reverse choices made, can try to redeem but cannot undo. Understand this, accept this, redeem knowing it does not undo. Build good knowing it does not eliminate harm, give knowing it does not restore. Try to redeem, but understand you cannot undo. You must be able to live with your choices. This is the final requirement, the personal requirement, the requirement that determines whether you should build empires. Can you live with choices required? Can you bear responsibility created? Can you carry weight imposed? Can you face consequences produced? Can you live with knowing you hurt people? Can you accept that empire required harm? Can you bear that power created responsibility? Can you face that redemption does not undo? Can you live with your choices? If yes, build empires. If no, do not. Because inability to live with choices will destroy you, will break you, will consume you. You must be able to live with your choices. This is the requirement, the final requirement, the requirement that determines everything. These are the ethics of building an empire. Not simple, not clean, not pure, not easy, complicated, messy, difficult, real. The ethics I lived, the choices I made, the responsibility I bear, the consequences I face, the truth about building empires, the truth no one wants to hear, the truth that success stories omit, the truth that must be told, because people considering building empires must know, must understand, must face, must accept. The ethics of building an empire, complicated, brutal, necessary, real. The ethics I lived, the truth I must tell. I built an empire. People suffered in the building. I tried to redeem the suffering. The redemption did not undo the harm. I live with both the building and the harm, the achievement and the suffering, the empire and the cost. I live with the choices I made barely, some days with peace, some days with guilt, but I live with them because I believe the empire justified the hurt, because I believe the value outweighed the harm, because I believe the good balanced the suffering. I believe, I hope, I tell myself, but I do not know, cannot know, can only live with the choices, can only bear the responsibility, can only carry the weight, can only face the consequences, the ethics of building an empire, the choices I made, the responsibility I bear, the truth I must tell, the reality of building empires, complicated, brutal, real, the ethics of building an empire.